The cold winds whipped across the barren landscape of the frozen planet, biting through the thin layer of atmosphere as the dawn strike hovered above the surface. For days the ship had circled the planet, its sensors struggling to pierce the thick layers of ice and snow that cloaked the ground below. But something had changed, something that couldn't be ignored. Captain Elena Voss stood in the observation bay, gazing out at the wintry desolation. It had taken the crew 3 weeks to decipher the Katorian message, and though the riddle was cryptic, Elena felt the weight of its significance pressing down on her shoulders. The words, "Find the tomb," had haunted her dreams. What was this tomb? What ancient secrets lay buried beneath the ice? He crew had been restless since their arrival in the system. For days there had been nothing to indicate the presence of intelligent life, let alone a Katorian artifact. The sensors had found only the frozen remains of a planet that had long since given up any claim to warmth or vitality. Elena's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden ping from the communication console. Her first officer, Lieutenant Marcus Trell, spoke up from behind her. "Captain, we've found something. I think we've located the source." Elena turned sharply. "Source of what?" "The signal," Marcus said, pointing at the display. "It's coming from below the surface, beneath the ice. It's faint but definitely artificial." A surge of hope flickered through Elena. She walked briskly to the console, eyes narrowing at the data streaming across the screen. The signal was unlike anything the dawn strike had encountered before. An ancient transmission, encoded in a language that had been thought extinct for millennia. "The tomb?" she asked, though it felt more like a question she was asking herself. "It's the best lead we've got," Marcus replied, already beginning to plot a course to the coordinates. "Should I prepare the landing team?" Elena nodded. "Yes. Get everyone ready. We need to find out what's down there." The landing was more treacherous than they had expected. As the ship touched down on the icy plains, the crew could feel the cold seeping into their bones. The atmospheric conditions were harsh, and the ice beneath them cracked ominously, a constant reminder that they were on a world whose stability could be as fleeting as the wind. The planet's surface was a blanket of snow, as though nature itself had given up its will to shape the land. It stretched endlessly in all directions, interrupted only by jagged mountains and deep crevasses that seemed to lead nowhere. Yet there was something else, something far more ancient, hidden beneath the frozen crust. The signal that had led them here seemed to pulse faintly, urging them forward. Elena, Marcus, and the rest of the landing team geared up in heavy survival suits, their breath fogging in the bitter cold. They made their way toward the coordinates, guided by the weak signal that seemed to come from beneath the ice. The landscape around them was barren, silent, and lifeless, save for the occasional gust of wind that rattled the team's suits. For hours, they trudged through the snow, following the signal's faint pulse until finally they came upon a massive fissure in the ice, a crack running deep into the planet's crust. The signal was strongest here. Elena's heart raced as she peered down into the abyss. What was waiting for them at the bottom? "Captain, I'm detecting something down there," Ensign Lee, the ship's communications officer, said, her voice tight with excitement. "It's an entrance." Elena squinted into the darkness below. A faint glow emanated from the depths of the crevasse, just visible through the crack in the ice. There was no mistaking it. An artifact, ancient and alien, buried deep within the heart of the planet. "Let's go," Elena said, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of anticipation. The team set up a rappel system to lower themselves into the fissure, the ropes creaking in the cold as they descended. The air grew colder the deeper they went, and the crack in the ice seemed to widen, revealing more of the ancient structure hidden beneath the surface. Minutes later, they reached the bottom, where they found themselves standing in front of what could only be described as a temple, a massive stone structure carved from the very heart of the planet. Its surface was smooth and polished, untouched by the erosion that had ravaged the world above. The architecture was unlike anything Elena had ever seen. Intricate, flowing designs that seemed to defy all logic, as though the very stone had been shaped by something far more advanced than humanity could comprehend. "This is it?" Marcus said, his voice filled with awe. Elena nodded, her breath caught in her throat. The tomb of the Katorians was real. It was here, buried beneath the ice, for who knew how many millennia. But the most surprising thing was the language. The walls of the temple were covered in symbols, patterns of ancient writing that seemed to shimmer in the dim light of their suits. They pulsed with an eerie glow, as if the very language itself was alive. "Captain, look at this," Ensign Lee said, pointing to a set of symbols near the entrance. "This doesn't look like Katorian script. It looks older." Elena studied the symbols, her mind racing. She had seen something like this before. In the data archives back on Earth, in the ancient texts, there were references to a language, a dead language, thought to have been lost for centuries. It was the language of the earliest human civilizations, a tongue that predated written history. And yet, here it was, etched into the walls of a Katorian tomb. Her heart skipped. The connection was undeniable. "Is that—" Marcus began, but he trailed off, sensing the same realization that had just hit Elena. "It's Earth's first language," Elena whispered, her voice trembling. "The Katorians, they spoke it." The team stood in stunned silence. The implications of this discovery were enormous. The Katorians, an advanced species that had once considered humanity beneath them, had a shared history with Earth. They had once spoken the same language. Elena felt a shiver run down her spine. How had humanity lost this connection? How had the Katorians come to view Earth as primitive when they shared a common origin? "Need to study these symbols," Elena said, shaking herself out of her reverie. "We need to decipher them." The crew fanned out, their eyes scanning the walls for more clues. It was a painstaking process. Each symbol was like a piece of a puzzle, and yet the language was so ancient that it seemed to defy understanding. But as the team worked, something miraculous began to happen. A pattern emerged, slowly at first, but then with greater clarity. Words began to take shape. Elena's hands trembled as she traced one of the symbols. It was familiar. She had seen it in the ancient text, but never in this context. The word translated to "awake." "This is a message," Elena said softly. "A warning." As she continued to decode the symbols, more words began to surface, each one more ominous than the last. "Return what was taken. Do not awaken the past. The tomb is a prison." "Prison?" Marcus asked, stepping closer. "What do you mean, a prison?" Elena turned to him, her face pale. "I don't know yet, but I think the Katorians didn't just bury something here. They sealed it away, and if we're not careful—" A low rumble vibrated through the temple, shaking the walls. The ground beneath them seemed to shift. Elena's heart raced. "What did we just do?" Ensign Lee whispered, her voice trembling. Then, all at once, the symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, pulsating in a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. The air around them seemed to grow thick, heavy with something that couldn't be described. It was as though the tomb itself was alive, waking after an unimaginable slumber. "Elena," Marcus said urgently, his voice tight. "We need to leave, now." But it was too late. A deep, echoing sound reverberated through the temple, and the walls began to crack. The very earth seemed to groan in protest as the ground shifted, and something began to stir within the depths of the tomb. Elena's eyes widened in horror. "Whatever they sealed away," she whispered, "it's coming." The discovery of the Katorian tomb had set in motion something far greater than any of them could have anticipated. The ancient language, the symbols, the warnings, they were all part of something much larger, something that would soon change the fate of humanity. And whatever was buried within that tomb, Elena knew, was not just a relic of the past. The landscape of the frozen planet stretched before Elena Voss like an endless canvas of ice and snow. The pale blue skies were empty of any signs of life, and the barren plains reflected the dim light of the distant binary stars above. The surface of the planet appeared unchanged for millennia, frozen in time, cold and desolate. But Elena knew better. The signal they detected from orbit, weak and distant, yet unmistakably artificial, was a clue, a faint pulse that had sent her crew plunging into this icy wasteland, hoping to find the tomb mentioned in the cryptic message from the Katorian ambassador. It was impossible to ignore the weight of the moment. After years of research, of theoretical science and star maps, humanity had finally made its first contact with an alien civilization. Yet now, the promise of understanding the Katorians, of unlocking their ancient history and culture, seemed to rest in the hands of a message so cryptic, so old, that no one could fully comprehend its meaning. Elena stood at the observation window of the Dawnstrike, gazing out at the barren expanse. The stars were muted through the haze of atmosphere, a soft shimmer of distant light. She had been waiting for this moment for months, but the reality of the discovery felt far more ominous than anticipated. Behind her, Marcus Trell, her first officer, approached with purpose. "Captain, we've found something." His voice carried a hint of excitement, an excitement that was tinged with an undercurrent of caution. Elena turned to him, her mind already calculating the implications of his words. "What have you found?" "The signal," Marcus said, leaning over the console. "It's coming from beneath the ice, definitely artificial. It's faint, but it's there. I think we've found the entrance to whatever the Katorians left behind." A ripple of anticipation surged through Elena's chest. Prepare the landing team," she ordered. We're going in." The descent was every bit as harsh as they had anticipated. The Dawnstrike shuddered as it cut through the planet's thick atmosphere, the cold winds battering its hull. Below, the surface was a wasteland of cracked ice and jagged rock, stretching out as far as the eye could see. In the distance, the signal seemed to pulse faintly, guiding them toward. As the crew assembled and suited up in heavy survival gear, Elena couldn't help but feel the weight of history pressing on her shoulders. They were about to make a discovery that could rewrite everything humanity knew about its place in the galaxy. They were going to stand face to face with the Katorians, beings whose technology and culture far surpassed their own. But what lay in store beneath the frozen surface? Was this tomb merely a relic of an ancient civilization, or something more? Her boots crunched in the snow as they descended to the surface, the freezing wind howling through their suits. The temperature was well below freezing, and even with the protective layers, every breath felt like inhaling shards of ice. They made their way across the frozen landscape, each step deliberate as they followed the faint trail of the signal. The landscape was eerily silent, except for the sound of their breathing in the helmets, their footsteps echoing in the deep, empty stillness. They reached a deep crevasse in the ice, a gaping crack in the planet's surface that seemed to stretch for miles. The signal grew stronger here, and as Elena peered into the darkness below, she could make out the faintest flicker of something glowing, something unnatural. "There it is," said Ensign Lee, the communications officer, her voice tight with excitement. "The source of the signal. It's coming from below." The team stood at the edge of the crevasse, looking down at the abyss. A rope system was quickly set up, and one by one they began to descend into the chasm. The walls of the crevasse were jagged, rough rock and ice, and the glow that had caught their attention became clearer as they went deeper. It was an ethereal light, coming from deep within the ice itself, as if the frozen world had secrets hidden beneath its surface. At last they reached the bottom. What greeted them was nothing short of extraordinary. In the center of the chasm stood a massive stone structure almost entirely encased in ice. It was a temple, its edges smooth and perfectly angular, as though shaped by hands far more advanced than their own. The walls were covered in intricate patterns, strange symbols that seemed to move and shimmer in the dim light of their suits. "Is this?" Marcus began, his voice filled with awe. "It's unbelievable." "It's the tomb," Elena said softly. "This is what we were looking for." The team moved cautiously toward the entrance, their boots crunching on the icy floor. As they neared the entrance, Elena's breath caught in her throat. The architecture was unlike anything she had ever seen, sleek and organic, like the structure had grown out of the very rock of the planet itself. The stone was smooth, almost glass-like, but still retaining the age and weight of a civilization long gone. "This is a Katorian tomb," Marcus said, his voice reverberating in the enclosed space. "But what's it doing here on Earth's ancient language?" Elena was already studying the markings on the walls, her eyes scanning the delicate carvings. They were not the Katorian symbols she had studied during the long months of preparation. These were older, much older. She stepped closer to one of the larger symbols, her gloved hand hovering over it. The writing was worn but still legible, faint grooves running deep into the stone. It was a language, no doubt about it, but the strange characters were unlike any other language humans had ever seen. And then a realization hit her. It was Earth's first language. For a moment, the world around her seemed to blur. The connection was undeniable. The ancient tongue, thought to have been lost to time, was right here, etched into the very heart of a tomb constructed by beings from another star system. But why? Why would the Katorians, a civilization that considered humanity beneath them, use a language from Earth's long-forgotten past? "Captain," Ensign Lee called out, her voice quivering with excitement, "look at this." Lee pointed to a set of symbols on the wall near the entrance. Elena knelt down and examined the symbols closely. They were familiar, even more so than the first set she had studied. There was no mistaking it. It was Earth's oldest written language, the language that predated recorded history, the script of humanity's earliest ancestors, the language of the Sumerians, the Babylonians, the Egyptians. But the markings here, on the walls of the Katorian tomb, carried a deeper meaning. It was as if the two civilizations, the Katorians and humanity, had once shared something greater, something now lost. "We've been looking at this all wrong," Elena whispered to herself. "This isn't just a tomb, it's a message that connects our worlds." The symbols began to reveal a translation, faint, like echoes from the past, but as they decoded the words, the message became clearer. It says, "Return what was taken. Awaken the past. The tomb holds the key." Elena stood up, her heart racing. The message was ancient, warning them against awakening something they didn't fully understand. "Return what was taken?" Marcus asked. "What does that mean?" "I don't know," Elena replied, her mind racing. "But I'm starting to think that we're not supposed to be here." Before she could say another word, the ground beneath their feet trembled. A low rumbling sound filled the tomb, sending vibrations through the stone floor. "Is it an earthquake?" Ensign Lee asked, panic creeping into her voice. "No," Elena said, her eyes wide with realization. "It's not the planet shaking, it's the tomb." The walls of the structure seemed to shift, the patterns on the stone glowing brighter, pulsing with energy. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, as if the tomb itself was alive, reacting to their presence. "Elena!" Marcus shouted. "We need to get out of here!" But Elena stood frozen, her mind spinning. Whatever force had been sealed within this tomb, whatever had been buried here, was beginning to stir. "What have we done?" she whispered. "We've awakened something." Suddenly, the symbols on the walls exploded into a brilliant light, illuminating the entire chamber. A door, hidden within the ice and stone, began to open, revealing what lay beyond. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Whatever was waiting for them on the other side of that door was not just a relic of the past. It was something far more dangerous. This extended chapter now provides more detail about the tomb's discovery and the ramifications of the symbols and message within, as well as the growing tension surrounding the team's actions. The narrative further explores the connection between humanity and the Katorians, setting up a deeper mystery about what lies within the tomb and the warnings they have uncovered. Let me know if you'd like to continue or adjust anything. The tomb shook again, the walls groaning as if something long dormant was beginning to stir. Elena Voss staggered as the ground beneath her feet quaked, her heartbeat quickening. The rumbling sensation was more than physical. There was an eerie resonance that seemed to vibrate through her bones, reverberating in the very air of the tomb. The deep, guttural hum was unlike anything she had ever heard. The crew around her was in a panic. Ensign Lee had fallen back, her face pale with shock. "What's happening, Captain?" she gasped, looking to Elena for an explanation. Elena didn't have one. The symbols, those ancient markings, had illuminated the room with an intensity she hadn't expected. The faint glow that had once barely flickered on the walls now blazed, bathing them in an unnatural, ethereal light. They were no longer just symbols, they were a beacon, calling to something, awakening something, buried within the tomb. "We need to leave, now!" Marcus Trell's voice cut through the tension. His tone was urgent, and there was a hint of fear that Elena had never heard from him before. But Elena couldn't move. Her feet were planted firmly in the ground, her gaze fixed on the door that had begun to open. It was slow, deliberate, as though something heavy and ancient was being stirred from its slumber. The air seemed to grow colder by the second. "It's happening," Elena muttered under her breath. The connection between the Katorians, the ancient symbols, and Earth's own forgotten language was becoming clearer with each passing moment, but she could not yet fully comprehend the implications. Whatever they had disturbed down here wasn't just some relic of the past. The tomb was more than a crypt. It was a warning, a prison. And they had awoken what lay within. The door, made of smooth stone and ice, creaked open with an eerie groan. It revealed a dark passage beyond, one that led into the very heart of the tomb. Whatever lay beyond that threshold had been locked away for countless millennia, and now the key had been turned. "Elena, we need to move," Marcus said again, his voice sharp, though there was something almost pleading in it. But Elena could not tear herself away. A whisper, faint and low, seemed to reverberate through the stone, curling around her like an invisible thread. The air grew thick and a sense of dread filled her chest, suffocating her. "Did you hear that?" Ensign Lee whispered, her voice trembling. "It sounded like a voice." Elena didn't answer. She couldn't. The voice wasn't audible to anyone else. It was more of a sensation than a sound. An ancient consciousness, pushing against the barrier of time. The rumbling intensified, the air thickening with an unsettling pressure. Elena stepped forward, ignoring Marcus's shout to halt. As if drawn by an unseen force, she moved toward the opening door. Her boots made no sound on the stone floor, her breath coming in shallow bursts as she passed through the threshold. "What the hell are we doing?" Marcus hissed, but Elena was already inside. The corridor was long, its walls lined with more symbols, more markings in the ancient language. The passage was cold, uncomfortably so, and as they ventured deeper, it felt as though the temperature was dropping with every step. The lights in their suits flickered erratically, and the pulse from the symbols on the walls seemed to match the erratic beats of their own hearts. The silence in the tomb was absolute, save for the sound of their breath and the soft crunch of their boots on the stone. They reached a large chamber at the end of the corridor, and that's when the true scale of the tomb became apparent. The chamber was vast, wider than any space they had encountered in the icy caverns outside. A vaulted ceiling soared above them, supported by massive stone pillars that seemed to stretch into the very fabric of the tomb itself. The walls were covered in carvings and inscriptions, but the most striking feature was at the center of the room, a massive stone sarcophagus. It was carved from a single piece of rock, its surface smooth and unblemished, with intricate engravings spiraling down the sides. The markings on the sarcophagus seemed familiar, but Elena couldn't place them. The closer she got, the more she could sense a dark energy radiating from it, an aura of something powerful. A voice echoed through the chamber, low and reverberating, but not from any of them. It was ancient, incomprehensible at first, but there was a sense of recognition, as though part of her mind had already been here before. The words began to take shape, the ancient language slipping into her consciousness. "Always awaken us, and you will know what you have lost." Elena's body went rigid. She could feel the weight of the voice, not in her ears but in her mind. The ancient words were a message, an invitation, but also a warning. She reached out instinctively, her hand trembling as it hovered just above the sarcophagus. "Don't touch it," Marcus shouted, pulling her back. "We don't know what this is." But Elena didn't move. The sensation, the whispering voice, was overpowering. She could feel it deep within her bones, an undeniable pull, an irresistible force that was slowly unraveling the mystery of the Katorians and their connection to Earth. What you awaken is more than a memory. It is the past itself. "Captain," Ensign Lee's voice was barely a whisper. "What if it's not meant to be disturbed?" "I don't think it was meant to be found at all," Elena whispered, her eyes fixed on the sarcophagus. The light from their suits flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows across the walls of the tomb. "But it's too late now." The ground trembled again, but this time the rumbling was deeper, more pronounced. The sarcophagus began to shift, its massive form groaning as if coming to life. Slowly, with a sound that chilled the air, the lid of the sarcophagus began to rise. "Elena, we need to leave now!" Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her back, but Elena resisted. She couldn't tear her gaze away from the ancient vessel. Inside the sarcophagus was not the remains of a being, not the ancient body she had expected. Instead, the opening revealed a glowing object, an orb-like sphere, pulsing with an unnatural energy. The air in the chamber crackled with electricity, the symbols on the walls glowing with greater intensity. "It's a power source," Ensign Lee whispered, her voice filled with awe and fear. Elena's mind raced. What was this? It wasn't a body, but something far more dangerous. She felt the weight of history pressing against her, the silent weight of millennia hanging over her every decision. The Kentorians hadn't buried something here. They had hidden a power, a force far beyond anything humanity could imagine. The orb pulsed again, its light intensifying, and the chamber filled with a deafening hum. It wasn't a voice anymore, it was a presence, ancient and vast, radiating power and knowledge. The tomb was no longer just a structure. It was alive, awake, and it was reaching out to them. "We need to get out of here," Marcus said, his voice breaking through the growing chaos. "Now, Elena." But it was too late. The orb glowed brighter, casting long shadows against the walls as the ground beneath them began to crack. The tomb itself was reacting, like a creature waking after a long slumber. The stone pillars trembled and the ceiling groaned as if the entire structure was shifting. Elena felt a surge of understanding, an overwhelming flood of knowledge that threatened to drown her. The tomb was more than just a Katorian relic, it was a vault, a repository of their ancient history, their technology, and the very foundation of their civilization. The power that had been buried here had been sealed away for a reason. Whatever force had been trapped within the orb was not just a weapon. It was a link to the past, to the Katorians' origins, to Earth itself. The tomb, it seemed, was not just a place. It was a prison, and what was imprisoned here was now awakening. "Elena, we need to go." "Now!" Marcus shouted, tugging her back as the chamber started to collapse. But Elena could not move. She was frozen, her mind locked in the grip of something far beyond her understanding. The orb's light pulsed again, and then the walls exploded into a blinding burst of energy.